Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem with me, Ann Shafer. I'm an independent curator and I specialize in prints and printmaking. Now we're talking about fine art, limited edition prints, usually. We're talking about engravings and etchings, woodcuts, screen prints, lithographs, that sort of thing. Within the umbrella of Platemark, we're running a few different series. There's an ongoing series of interviews with people who occupy various roles in the print ecosystem, like curators and artists, printers and gallerists. But this is Series 2, A History of Prints. In this episode, our resident s2e, that's subject matter expert, Tru Ludwig, will take us on a journey to meet and fall in love with the first woman artist to occupy an entire episode, Maria Sibylla Merian. She was a naturalist and published several books on her own that explore the metamorphosis of bugs. She traveled to the West Indies to record animals and bugs and plant life, and she really had agency over her own life. It's sort of remarkable. I think you will love her as much as we do. After that, we'll move on to Hogarth. William Hogarth. Tru is insisting that we get that episode up before the election, so we'll be busting butt to do that. And then we'll move on to the likes of Goya. I hope you're enjoying the history of prints. I think it's a vital part of our work and a service that we fully stand behind. Sharing the story of prints and how they've been at the crux of our history from the beginning seems really urgent at this point. I feel really passionate about prints, and I feel passionate about our shared visual culture and how important it is for all of us to understand how information got circulated way back in the day and how it continues to get circulated on that thing called the internet. It's all part of the same thing, people. The early printed image was that era's internet. And they're so cool. I love them. And you know I'm always shouting from the rooftop. I call myself a print evangelist, and I just believe wholeheartedly that it's a corner of the art world that needs to have a little bit more sunlight shone upon it. So, if you are a regular listener, you'll know that the images that Tru and I talk about will be over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You'll also find that there's a place to sign on for our newsletter, which I send out to announce each episode, but also sometimes other things. And also you can click through to join our Facebook group, where we have 800 people watching and talking and showing and learning about prints. Tru and I will do our positionality inside the episode, but also need to just report that we record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. I think that's it. Let's get rolling. Hey, Tru, it's great to see ya.
Hey, long time no see. Glad you're back.
See, yeah.
So,
What do we got today?
We have
Wait, should we do positions and stuff?
an opportunity to be very positional.
Yeah, we almost forgot. Nearly forgot. Let's do it.
You go first.
All right, I'll go first. Ladies first. A little housekeeping for you. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her.
I identify as a gay white trans man, and I use the pronouns he, him. But this does not change the fact that I'm an ardent feminist. And today's topic will definitely prove that.
Okay, all right.
So today we're going to continue our little romp with the Enlightenment. I wanted to bring up the topic of the marvelous Maria Sibylla Merian, and it was going to be and other naturalists. But now it's just Maria Sibylla Merian versus other naturalists.
Oh, interesting.
Because she predates them.
Oh.
And she kicks their ass.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, this is exciting because I don't know a lot about her.
She is just, now there may be people that completely know all about her, but I got to tell you, this is not something that I knew about until I had the luxury of taking my History of Prints class to the George Peabody Library, which is, of course, one of Baltimore's great treasures, because they have everything in first edition books from Aardvark to Zanzibar. And the first time I became aware of her was when Dr. John Buchtel pulled out her book, Metamorphosis of the Insects of Suriname.
Oh, gosh.
I'm like, what? And it was from 1705.
Whoa.
Which just seems early, because what right now we're talking about Enlightenment and its legacy and Enlightenment thoughts. Well, this woman really is an Enlightenment thinker. There's no question about that, but she is super early. So I wanted to just sort of cast her in this long line of thinking of the naturalists, because that's another aspect of the Enlightenment that I just wanted to remind folks and remind myself, perhaps. We had talked about the Enlightenment as a way of how it grew out of the Baroque era, if you will. And basically, we've been very Franco-centric for a while. Certainly, France was the big deal there. Of course, Italy was a huge force in the Baroque era, very Catholic. And the French, well, thank you, Louis XIV. He died, Louis XIV dies in 1715, and everybody kind of thinks that's how the curtain comes down on the Baroque era in France.
All right.
And with all of that, with Louis and the Baroque era, we had talked about authoritarianism, and in the church, I am the state. And it took 400 courtiers to get that fool dressed in the morning. And, he was the Sun King. And
is that true?
Yeah.
400?
Yeah.
What the hell were they doing?
I know, right? Everyone had a hair that they had to put in. And the other part of this was that, with this establishment of the French Academy of Fine Art during Louis' reign and its reorganization, that kind of authoritative force in the fine arts was a big voice.
Sort of government sanctioned.
Absolutely.
Right, which is new.
Yeah.
The centralization of art education.
Absolutely. Just like the centralization of the power that is at Versailles with the same floor plan as Washington, D.C. It's like you can protect it and it is the central thing. And we had talked at length about the hierarchy of academic subjects. Now, the cool thing, of course, about printmaking is that it is that lovely little, some would say, ugly stepchild, the shrinking violet of the fine arts, but it's so dazzling because it gets to sneak around on the perimeters, kind of like a youngest who does not want to get caught.
Oh.
And it allows artists a lot more freedom than if they had to paint big paintings that are for a client or the church or the state or what have you. If you were working inside of the hierarchy of the academic tradition, you would probably have to do history paintings if you wanted to make a name for yourself, or portraits or landscapes. Still life, that was okay. Genre, the people, the simple folk, bottom of the heap. And this...
You're not going to sing a little Julie Andrews for us?
What
do the simple folk do?
To lighten the load when they're blue. The cobbler and the our some folks don't know. No, thanks. Now I'm... Okay. Squirrel.
I knew I could do
you
it.
Little fart. So the idea of all of these traditions and who's in charge and the academicians who are in charge. I'm going to one more time bring up this wonderful portrait by Joachim Zaffany, who had painted the academicians of the Royal Academy in 1771. And it's 35 guys. And on the wall, there are 2 women. And what we're going to do is talk about one woman who managed to do so much outside the academic realm and proved herself in so many ways. It's just so remarkable to me that she was so savvy in what she accomplished. But
she's not one of those women.
Absolutely
not. Kaufman, and who's the other one?
Angelica Kaufman and Mary
Moser.
Whoever
that is.
Well, there's the problem. Right?
Yeah, there you go.
At least we know Angelica Kaufman. But the idea of what women were able or allowed to be, of course, these 2 women couldn't be present for a life drawing lesson. We'll just wait till you hear about what women were allowed to do. So the idea that we had also entertained was the concept of the Enlightenment and how it's the age of reason. And it was really the birth of science. The concept of direct observation, the power of reason, not superstition, and the perfectibility or the knowledge of education is key to human progress. All of these things are what make Maria Sibylla Merian so remarkable. When we think about Enlightenment thinkers, who do you think about? Not that I'm giving you any prompts here at all, Ann.
This is very handy. Let's see. That's Voltaire over there, and Benjamin Franklin, and Mr. Jefferson. No, that's Mr. Washington.
That's Jorge Washington, but Jefferson could be.
Sorry.
But yeah, and Jefferson, all those boys, right?
Oh, of course.
They're all the boys. And of course, it was Voltaire that we know about how he says, écraser l'infâme, let's crush the evil thing of religion and use reason to negotiate our ways forward. Well,
did that mean, though, that he wasn't, maybe he wasn't religious, but he probably attended church? You don't think? I sort of wonder.
Okay, all you Voltairians are going to just get on our backs.
Well, this is good to know, because, You would think that if you were that kind of a thinker, you would want to understand
Correct.
yeah.
Correct. And in our prior episode, we had talked about how Diderot had established his encyclopédie and that there was a whole entry on God.
Right.
And the idea of science questions the truth and the strength and the omnipresence and the omnipower of God. And we talked about anatomy and the idea of understanding what's underneath the skin and that desire to know what's there. The Enlightenment and the birth of the modern world and how education is progress and you can reform institutions and you can develop the taste of the middle class as they come up and all of these other kinds of concepts. Well, our girl, Maria Sibylla Merian, did all of those things. And she should be one of those great heads that we would see, a portrait bust of Ben Franklin or TJ or GW or, Voltaire. But what you do finally get to find out, because I didn't hear word one about her when I was coming up.
Oh, no,
not word one.
Mm-mm.
Because you might say, well, she painted flowers. That's nice. Well, she was such a powerhouse in her time, but then was eclipsed. And it was the 19th and early 20th century that really bashed her down, because in her own time, she was extremely well regarded.
Huh.
So she essentially had, in the late 80s, kind of a rebirth and a resurgence, thank you, feminists, to the point that she was born in Germany. She became the face on the 500 Deutschmark from 1992 to December 2001 until the euro.
Oh, wow.
She was a face on that. And on the back of the Deutschmark, you would be able to see her artwork.
Huh.
It's one thing when you see Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People on a French franc. Of course, we'll see this. And she was even on a stamp, on postage stamps in Germany. That tells you that there was some high regard that was resurrected. Well, so what's going on with this amazing person? Well, okay, so there are adults like me who see a number and go, oh, that's blah, blah, blah. So the first thing I notice is, look, I highlighted in yellow for you, Ann. What does it say?
She was born on April 2.
April 2nd, 1647 in Frankfurt am Main. April 2nd, that's Peter Milton's birthday. That also means that she's an Aries, like me.
Uh-huh.
That's a pioneering person. I mean, you'll see. She's a pioneering person. Happy birthday, Peter Milton.
In Germany, would it be Maria?
Maria, like, Ave
Okay.
Maria or the Marienkirche.
Oh, right, Maria.
That's why I don't want to say Maria.
Yeah.
Because it's not a problem like Maria. It's Maria Sibylla Merian, right?
Gotcha.
So I'll probably vacillate, and I'm going to be sorry.
All
But
right. Sorry, everyone. We mean to say Maria.
Well, it's like, oh, God. Yesterday was Kate Colvitt's birthday.
It was.
Kathy Colvitz was a great artist.
Oh, no.
Oh, God.
On the radio?
Oh, no, on YouTube. And it's Kathy Colvitz. It's Kate. It has an umlaut, and there's no in Germany. It's Kate Colvitz. It's just get it right. At any rate, our girl, Maria Sibylla Merian, was born in 1647. That's during the life of Rembrandt. That's during the life of Bernini.
Yeah.
That's during the life of Rembrandt, Bernini. Rubens has just died in 1640. Caravaggio died in 1610, so he doesn't count.
Okay.
But she's right there. Oh, well, but the idea, think of this. She's born in Germany, but notice that she dies in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, in Dutch territory.
Uh-huh.
So it's interesting to know that this young woman, she was known as a naturalist, one of the very first, and a nature artist. And she's the one who really, you would say, oh, she did insects and plants. Okay. But the thing that's so amazing is that she is the first one who really tackled the concept of metamorphosis.
Whoa.
She looked at this stuff and she contributed in such a tremendous way to the study of entomology that typically kind of 18th century, we've got to know more about all of these kinds of things and categorize them. She's the one that made that possible. And
so she wasn't just painting bugs because she liked them. She was being very systematic about it.
Absolutely. And in a really remarkable way. Now, she didn't label them in Latin, which was probably one of the things that kind of might have played against her at one point, but she was so...
Well, but who was naming things in Latin?
Well, okay, when we start talking about naming things in Latin, you think about genus and species.
Yeah.
That's Linnaeus. But he's half a century later.
Oh.
She predates him.
So she was too early.
She's
And a woman. And
yes, exactly.
Exactly.
So here's the thing, but she's so freaking savvy.
Amazing.
So her father was the renowned printer and illustrator Matthias Merian the Elder. And he was born in Basel, and he was from a patrician kind of a family in Basel, Switzerland. And he was a printer, he had a printing house. And the thing was, though, that he died when she was only 3. Nevertheless, she was around that milieu. Now, she's also what I would say, when I was a senior in college, I took a class, American Studies class with Jim Farrell, and he introduced the concept of a dense fact.
Mm-hmm.
This woman is a dense fact. She is at the crux of so many interesting things because, she's born in Frankfurt am Main, but then she moves to Nuremberg.
Oh.
Somebody had a printing house there.
He did.
A certain dude, Dürer and all of those folks, that whole crew. So I wanted for you to also enjoy the fact that we have a portrait of her that was probably done by her stepfather because her mom remarried after her father, Matthias, had died. Nevertheless, I needed to put Matthias on your radar.
Oh, okay.
Because we actually have, Matthias Merian Basiliensis. He's from Basel, Switzerland, but he's an engraver. He's an etcher. He's a book dealer. He's a leading German illustrator in the 17th century. He was very highly regarded. This blew my mind. Now, and this may not make any sense to you, but if you spend enough time hunting the stacks at the Peabody Library, he had married the oldest daughter of J.T. Debris, who was a publisher and engraver. Debris was a guy who had published a book on the cannibals and other tribes in the Americas.
Oh, Jesus.
So they had traveled to the Americas and they came back, and those were published in his father-in-law's house. And so he worked with his father-in-law. Then he came back to Basel and he takes over Debris' business. So he's a dense fact. Okay.
But this also goes to illustrate that most of the early female printmakers that we know are born into families in the business.
Absolutely. Now, admittedly, he dies when she's 3, but she's around that. Her mother's still there.
Well, if we know him as the elder, there must have been a younger.
Yeah.
Did he take over the business?
And he had 2, she had 2 brothers. So, so this is the coolest part. So, for instance, Merian had completed this huge record of discovery of the travels of the Collectionis Peregrination in India. And it began with the Debris in 1590. It included 2,000 of his etchings.
What?
In that pub. Yes.
This is Marianne the father.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And get this. He also had Wenceslas Haller. You know that name.
Sure.
We used to pull out that gorgeous Wenceslas Haller, the muff.
Yeah.
Oh, that gorgeous etching.
It is gorgeous.
Wenceslas Haller had come to Maria Sibylla Merian's father's studio to apprentice to him.
Oh.
Yeah. So this guy, from Prague had come and studied. And then, let's see, Merian was publishing illustrations for the Bible. And then he just did all this amazing stuff. And then, of course, he does this huge, his topographies of Germany with 2,000 plates that he's etched and engraved. And his sons, Matthias and Caspar, Maria's brothers, helped with that. And of course, I had to include that his last work was a
Dance of Death. How nice.
1649.
You go.
So it's like right in that pocket where, it's still that whole zone of the Dance of Death. Even Holbein had done a Dance of Death, and it was published in 1641. So, it's fascinating to note that his daughter picked up on some of this stuff.
These people should be better known.
Yeah. Well, but
But the print world is full of these characters,
and this is the
right?
thing. So in much the same way as you, who has this passion project of Platemark, where you introduce the world to all these fabulous human beings. I mean, even Wenceslas Haller, who had apprenticed to Matthias Merian, it's the same thing. It's like, introduce, hey, if you know this person, I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to interview them on Platemark. This, that, the other. Oh, have you met so-and-so? They're all, so get this. Wenceslas Haller, after he had interned or been the apprentice to Matthias, he ended up going to Frankfurt, and then he moves to Strasbourg, then to Cologne, and he comes to the attention of Thomas, Earl of Arundel, and he's part of the team that comes up with this whole series of illustrations after the London fire. So I'm trying to set this all into this little pocket of amazing time, because all of this is also going on at exactly the same time as the golden age of the Dutch Republic. Dutch Republic, Dutch East India Company, Rembrandt, the middle class, Vermeer, those cats.
Sea change.
Yeah. And in the middle of all of that, you have this lovely young woman.
Wait, there's more.
whose stepfather happens to be a still life painter named Jacob Marel. And she is, she's going to learn from him. And he teaches her about watercolor and all of these things. And his specialty is floral paintings. Now, of course, the image I'm showing you here is of tulips, because tulipomania, because the golden age of Holland and the Dutch Republic. These are pictures of tulips. What do you see in this lovely image of tulips?
Well, there are views of four sides of maybe one tulip, maybe two tulips, but then there's a butterfly.
Correct. And what he does is he has his stepdaughter collect insects and other specimens that he can enliven his floral paintings with. So there she is, this little girl who gets to watch this guy paint flowers, and she's been sent outside to go looking for neat specimens and plants and caterpillars and all kinds of cool things that were interesting. Well, now, in her day...
It's like staffage.
Absolutely, but conveniently so. So flowers were okay for women to paint in those days, right? She's a little girl, but she gets to go check out all these bugs and bring them in so that her stepdad can put them in his paintings and make them a little bit more interesting. So she grows up in this studio. She becomes very skilled in watercolor, and she also learns how to prepare the pigments, and she also learns how to prepare copper plates for printing. She knows the printing processes so well. Her late father has this publishing house. She's helping out, her stepdad. And she's incredibly precocious in her own work, because even at this tender young age, her illustrations of insects and plants are in various stages of their lives are incredibly adept, like really quite adept. Now, I'm also showing you something else, just as a little mind jogger. Over here, there's this gorgeous oil painting of flowers by Rachel Reich. The golden age of Dutch Republic was also the golden age of beautiful still lifes, vanitas still lifes, and that kind of interest. And also realize that the Dutch Republic was synonymous with the birth of the microscope, and Van Leeuwenhoek was coming to be able to see things with intense scrutiny. So this idea of being able to see the world in the macrocosm that is the heavens, but also in a tiniest little drop of water, is something that's all a piece of the puzzle here. And so we have this little girl who's learning cool stuff. She kind of reminds me of the Caddie Woodlawn of her art. I don't know if you know that book.
Caddie Woodlawn?
Oh, man, by Carol Ryrie Brink. Caddie Woodlawn was this pioneer girl. She's 12 years old, and she's a tomboy, and she goes out and does all this great stuff. I just thought she was the coolest, and well, eventually they squash her, and she has to leave all that behind her and go be a woman, and that's why it made me cry. But anyway.
A little foreshadowing.
Yeah, completely. In fact, I'm sure I told my therapist about that probably day one.
Probably.
Says the trans man. But at the same time, for instance, in the Dictionary of Women Artists, they have this line about her. The importance of Merian is based on specific, perhaps feminine synthesis of an observant and at the same time contemplative view of nature.
Wait, what? The importance of Merian is based on a specific, perhaps feminine
synthesis.
Screw you.
Of being observant and contemplating nature. It's
Wait, women are more observant. That's what?
Yeah. All right. Already, it's like even
say what now?
Even the Dictionary of Women Artists is going, oh, but that's a girl thing.
Oh,
it's
my
like,
heavens.
Right. So it's just one of those pissers. Now, here's the thing. So this young lady, she's like, let's say 13 years. I spent my time, this is a quotation from her.
She has journals?
Yes.
Sweet.
Copious journals.
Oh my God.
And then in the forewords to her books, she writes in the foreword. So in the foreword to, I believe, in the Metamorphosis of Insects of Suriname, she writes, I spent my time investigating insects. At the beginning, I started with silkworms in my hometown of Frankfurt. I realized that other caterpillars produced beautiful butterflies or moths, and that silkworms did the same. This led me to collect all the caterpillars I could find in order to see how they changed.
Huh.
So tomboy.
Yeah, for
All
sure.
right. So she eventually starts her own caterpillar collection.
Wait, but why is that a tomboy thing? Isn't that interesting?
Oh, it's totally a tomboy thing.
No, I know, but
Because she's out playing with bugs, and her stepdad says, "Go find me critters for my paintings."
I know.
Now
I
it
know.
wouldn't be.
Right.
But for anybody that grew up in
Yes.
our era.
Our era.
So the idea of her going out and looking for these things and studying how caterpillars change, you're not going to believe this, Anne, and how they mature into butterflies.
Well, it is the most remarkable thing that you can just watch the whole.
Because she actually did watch it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So she had this lifelong fascination with that, and she collected, and she literally reared the larvae, including the caterpillars and butterflies, and she recorded their life cycles. So she would take them from larva to pupa to chrysalis to when they came out of the chrysalis and became this other things. And get this, in her journal, she even writes, there's a great line from one of the many articles. Sometimes a pupa would surprise her by hatching into a swarm of flies or wasps rather than the butterfly or moth she had expected. She recorded this phenomenon as false changes, which may be the earliest scientific record of insect parasitism.
Oh, my.
She's observing this stuff because she's a kid going, ooh, what does that do?
Right.
How does it do? And she stays up all night to wait for these moths to hatch.
God.
And so this study of insects, that as we know it in the Enlightenment, hadn't even become a science until the 19th century. She's doing this in, like, let's say 1650.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wait, she's born in 47? No.
1647, so she's doing like 1660.
Yeah.
But still, she's like, right,
Yeah.
that's the year that Rembrandt dies, I believe.
1660?
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
So eventually she starts her own caterpillar collection, and she studies all of their different kinds of maturation, moths and butterflies, and whether, she would stay up all night if she needed to see them come out of the pupa so she could draw them at the moment. She was a patient, very analytical person. And I'm going to lie to you, when I started thinking about how she was going about this, I'm like, well, she's a woman. Women think in cycles. And they see things through.
Yeah.
And, the prevailing, as I'll show you in a minute, the prevailing idea was to work from dried specimens and to see them as tacked little specimens on the wall. But she always saw them as living beings that were in a process, a metamorphosis, which was not the prevailing theory of the day at all.
Wow.
When we think about how much we know about insects now, there was not even a field of entomology, until the 19th century.
That's crazy. I mean, is this another case where the Eastern companies,
Dutch East India?
No, like China, Japan, had they formulated a scientific?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I wonder.
I remember having seen this glorious book at the Peabody Library, like, where did this come from? It's 1705. And she's teaching herself all of these things. She's got this stepdad that said, here's how you use some watercolors, but it's her and her deciding, in the image I'm showing you here, which is the metamorphosis of the tiger moth. This is actually from one of her first books about the metamorphosis of bugs. I'll give you the title in a second. It shows all of the stages of them from the eggs to the pupa to the chrysalis to the caterpillar to, the whole cycle is there, including then what it hatches into. So you see all stages of that and the actual plant that is necessary for them to do what they do.
Oh.
Because she also realizes
they're plant specific?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Sure. Like monarch butterflies need milkweed.
Yeah.
Right? She was very well aware of that. So in all of her illustrations, she's going to show you the little microbiome that they need to exist. And so, it's all of that idea that from this young age, she made these incredible observations so carefully. And she's living in a time when people still believed that insects spontaneously emerged from mud or shit.
What?
Yes. That was still the prevailing idea. And she's observing these things. She's being patient and taking her time. But there's another interesting thing about this, because when I told you she's a dense fact, she's a Protestant. And there's another aspect to this. I mentioned earlier about how Conrad Gesneri had done the book on the animals of the world, and Albrecht Dürer had done his carving of the rhinoceros, which was all based on description. He had never seen one, right? So in the times leading up to her, those kinds of images, they would have taken their ideas from the authority of the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, the Aristotelian view of the world, or the teachings of the church. And those earlier kinds of, these are the beasties of the world, they would have all kinds of extraneous ideas about, the species, or proverbs, or references in history or the literature, and, and what it stands for, that it's all emblematic or symbolic of something. So, it's interesting also, it's even how are you going to classify these things? How do you order them? Like in the Conrad Gessner's animals, the book that Dürer, they were in alphabetical order because that's what they knew, right? There was no way of classifying them, you, right? So I wanted to share this particular passage with you because one of the things that I see in her, in Maria Sibylla Merian's thinking, is that she's treading a very fine line. You realize that she's also a Protestant living in a time when there are still wars of religious issue, where you're going to be. Are you going to be Protestant? You're going to be Catholic? What are you going to be? And she and her mom were devoutly Protestant. And many of the scholars of the time still believe that insects came from, as I say, spontaneous generation from rotting mud. And that
rotting.
But they're like, poof, there they are.
It does seem that way sometimes.
Well,
like
indeed.
The fruit flies. Like, where the hell did they come from?
Flies on shit, right?
Right.
But that was an idea from Aristotle that was also part of the teachings of the Catholic Church because, get this, I love this passage. Although St. Thomas Aquinas concluded that spontaneous generation of insects was the work of the devil, because studying bugs they were the devil's creatures. Pope Innocent V in the 13th century had declared that the belief in spontaneous generation went against church teachings, since all life was created in the first days of creation as chronicled in Genesis. Well,
oh boy.
So a lot of folks were still like, okay, we'll go with the Greek version that they're spontaneous. Okay, because this is a difficult time, where science is difficult, isn't it, Mr. Trump? So where are you going to go? If you really start thinking about who's investigating, if you even think about the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp, Rembrandt was a Protestant, and defiling the human body by carving into it went against the church, but not if you're a Protestant who is a man of science, who's going to learn about these things. I mean, there's a lot of layers there. And so this woman's theology and understanding how she was going to navigate that difficult thing, because she's observing things growing from eggs into the larval stage, into the next stage, and the next stage, and the next stage. So here's the title of the first book she puts out, The Caterpillar's Marvelous Transformation and Strange Floral Food.
Oh.
It's like, auf Deutsch.
Yeah.
But the caterpillar's marvelous transformation and strange floral food, she presents the stages of those different species of butterflies along with plants. And what she says in the preface, I love this. She says, do not seek my glory herein, but only in God's, to praise him as the creator also of these smallest and humblest of worms. Oh. She labeled her caterpillar book a book for the meditation rather than a scientific book, and it was to be seen as a way of a tradition of seeking God in nature.
Oh.
That's an outgrowth of St. Francis. God made it all. It's all beautiful. It's all good. She's saying...
But she's ratcheting herself down and
glorifying God.
Interesting.
She's saying, don't look to me for the glory in these illustrations I'm making. I'm making these as a way of contemplating what he made.
I see.
He put that whole, like dumb luck, right? He puts it in motion.
Right.
And so the idea that it has to be seen in the tradition of seeking God in nature, that's a really lovely, smart, eloquent way of coping with a difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that if you really wanted to think about it, the metamorphosis and going from caterpillar to butterfly, that's also a metaphor for resurrection.
Sure.
So, she studied these butterflies against the prevailing opinions of the day because they interested her, and she saw the visible truth. Direct observation, Science, not superstition. She's like, these are the facts of it. So it's interesting. I've got an illustration here, which I think is fairly atrocious.
It's really weird.
It's awful because, frankly, what it is a hand-colored version of a print of hers that was. But I chose this to put this here because it's like, oh, it's really weird. It's really bright. It's a lady in pretty clothes, and she's got a plant. She's kind of pointing to it, right? And it's not really telling us that much. And look, even behind her, there's a terrestrial and a celestial globe.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of wonderful, and there's a little butterfly around the little plant, and there's, time is ticking away in the background, and you can see that she's got some specimens that she had rendered down here in the lower right-hand corner. But, it's interesting to think of her as a woman in her time that the only art, air quotes, that women it was to make floral paintings, right? She's definitely doing that, but
well, that was because the ladies could go out to their little gardens and they didn't have to go far from home. And
correct.
Right.
Now get this.
Very
this
domestic.
Is a very
But Tru, what is that thing?
What are we pointing at?
This little blue handled, looks like a burin almost.
Oh, I think it is.
Oh,
we'll be able to tell when I show you the black and white version.
All right.
I'll bet you're right about that. Oh, you get a fist bump on that.
Thank
Good
you.
spotting.
Thank you.
It's so weird, this color. You can just totally tell it. Somebody got a hold of the print and hand colored this thing.
Good.
But, remember how much Albrecht Dürer is like, don't hand color my
don't touch my stuff.
So think about this young woman who has been given free rein by her stepfather to go look for these critters, and she's out in the garden looking for these things and collecting them, and nobody's telling her not to. And she collects all of these specimens. She's in the milieu of her family's publishing business. She's got these two brothers that are doing that. She publishes her first book early, and her first book is called the Neues Blumenbuch. That is her new flower book, which was essentially a floral pattern book for embroidery, of feminine art, in which she was also very capable. Well, so here she is. She's at home. She's doing what she's supposed to do. She's doing embroidery, and she's looking at her flowers. And, imagine this young woman where she's seeing that her brothers are traveling far and away, and they're getting to go everywhere, and she can't do that. So she's at home. But does she just go, well, okay, I'm just going to, knit one, purl two, and no. She learned as much as she possibly could. You'll see how she takes advantage of all of this cool stuff that's happening in this publisher's workshop. And, that's a hive, as you know, like Atelier 17. You've seen a print shop. It's like, everybody's in there. It's just like a wonderful thing. There's a fairly recent biography that was written by Kim Todd, and it's called Chrysalis, Maria Sibylla Merian and the Secrets of Metamorphosis. But there's this great passage in the book where Kim Todd says, the business depended on dreaming up fresh ideas, always a risky endeavor when the only reading material above suspicion was the Bible. Some had doubts about whether anyone but ministers should even read that. A refuge for scientists, religious minorities, and visionaries, a publisher's workshop drew free thinkers of every stripe. Think about how cool that is.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if you think about Copernicus and the heliocentric model and all of these different ideas, and Galileo publishing his ideas, and Vesalius publishing. Basel was a neutral area. All of these kinds of things, because she's a dense fact, right? She's in this moment, and she's hearing and she's listening to all the cool stuff that's going on in there.
For sure.
So at the age of 18, it's 1665 now, she's 18, and she marries one of her stepfather's apprentices, Johann Andreas Graf. And they have a daughter, Johanna Helena, and the family moves to Nuremberg from Frankfurt in 1670, and they open their own studio. Now, in Nuremberg, Maria Sibylla Merian worked as a flower painter and engraver, and she published 3 volumes of her engravings between 1675 and 1680. Now,
5 years, 3 volumes? Jesus.
Now, she's got kids. She's a wifey. She's keeping house,
right?
And she's doing, okay, now get this though. She had learned so much, and she had earned money by teaching embroidery to all of these wealthy daughters of local merchants in Nuremberg. And what that did was generate a bunch of important extra cash for the Graf household.
Huh.
How smart was this? These, as you pointed out, these merchants with their wealthy daughters often have greenhouses with exotic flowers from all of these different places. And that's how she could see these things and start
Source material.
So she's that smart, right?
Yep.
And so she's seeing these things and she's having this opportunity to see things that she would never otherwise get. And so she creates these flower books, the Blumenbuch. I've given you the frontispiece. This one is hand colored here. And, really, the two art forms that were available to women at the time were embroidery and flower painting. Well, look, what she does is she makes this book on blumens, but she puts insects on almost every single page, which is really pretty glorious.
Yeah.
And by the way, that Fraktur, come on, isn't that gorgeous? It's like, gorgeous. Can you tell I was published in Nuremberg? And I just wanted to give you one plate from that earlier book of flowers, just looking at how beautifully rendered this Turk's cap lily is. But notice that she's put in that dragonfly and this little moth that's, supping on that's the nectar of its beautiful little stamen. It's just, look how alive that is.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And it doesn't need a background. It wouldn't have needed one in the past, but somehow she manages to fill a page and have these lovely compositions.
Well, they're so three-dimensional.
Yeah.
Because of the added life of the bugs, I think.
Absolutely. And so think about this. Now, she's already had her first daughter, and then she has her second daughter, Dorothea Maria. She's born in 1678, and the following year, in 1679, she publishes another book on metamorphosis. How is she doing this? I don't know this.
Oh, boy.
How does she manage to make this happen? So her first caterpillar book, as she called them, this first caterpillar book, which, how is it? Der Raupen wunderbare Verwandlung.
Nice.
That's
well done.
The wondrous transformation of caterpillars and the remarkable diet of flowers. Nice little title. It had 50 copper plate engravings showing the full life cycle of insects and their associated plants in 1678.
Wow.
And I've given you just the not hand-colored version here, which is just so lovely. This title page shows the life cycle of the silkworms that she was so fascinated by on the mulberry leaves that they would munch on when she was growing up. So having watched all of these metamorphoses, that makes her do this book, and it was published by her husband in Nuremberg in 2 parts. And each of those has 50 copper engravings in them. And there's a text that explains the habitats, the life cycles of these insects.
Well, and let's also pause for a moment to discuss the complication of inserting etching into a movable type printed book.
Right, because she knows the copper plate engraving. She knows that stuff, and he's a printer.
Yeah.
So, hey, we got this right here in his backyard. So,
but it's still complicated in terms of, like, you print the prints on probably a different paper. Then you've got to get them into the folded, signatures.
And the quires and whatnot.
Thank you, the quires.
And get it all in order and have your catchphrases and have it all match up. Yep.
It's not a simple.
In the early books, mostly it was, I think the text and image might have been separated, but nevertheless, it's still, that's a hefty kind of project.
Yeah.
It helps to have hubby print them, but she's making her own plates.
Oh, I assume so.
Well, she already knows how to do it.
What man would say, I'm working for Maria, right?
But wait, there's more.
Oh, good.
This is the best part. So when she did the watercolors, she would make the watercolors on white vellum, on, calfskin. And then she'd remake them into the copper plate engravings.
Boy.
Now get this, the watercolors on white vellum, you're going to love this. Had to be in watercolor because there was something called the Nuremberg Painters Code that had been enacted in 1596. Are you ready? That excluded women from painting oil still lifes and botanical illustrations.
What?
And that remained the case until the 18th century. So she's like, well.
So she got around it by doing it in watercolor?
Absolutely.
Jesus.
And really good ones, too.
I'm sure.
Are you ready to see it?
I know. I was going to say, where are they?
Bang.
Wow.
And, so there's the beautiful title page, hand-colored.
Yeah.
And you look at the beautiful depth of this. I mean, you are a sucker for watercolor.
Oh,
you look at how
absolutely.
well she manages that.
Yeah.
That's just, it's so glorious. Just the text and the image integrating and the flourishes, all of those arabesques. It's just the way she uses the curlicues of the stems working in with the type. It's just astonishing,
It's
really.
beautiful.
So I wanted for you to be able to see how she can integrate text and image most remarkably. But now, this is the thing. She was aware of how the other guys at the time were doing it. Here's Johannes Godert, who is a guy that wrote the Pictor Medio Bergenensis. What we have is Jan Godert was a Dutch artist who also painted insect still lifes, but this is the way all the other guys were doing it. What do you see here, Ann? I've given you both an unpainted copper plate and the painted version.
Right.
What are you seeing?
Well, it's a very, very uninteresting diagram. There's one form of the caterpillar, the chrysalis, and then the butterfly, and they're labeled A, B, and C.
And they're flat.
And they're just flat and stacked up so that you get a sense of the form, but no.
You can almost sense that the pins are stuck in them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're specimens. And if you look at, I've put in the lower left-hand corner, I put her version of a plate that says, this is the various stages, and you can see the plant and the flourish of that thing, and it fills the space. It's beautifully composed.
The story is so much more complicated with the way the caterpillar gets to where he gets, or she gets, that is being missed by Godard.
Completely missed.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a woman who already now has 2 kids.
2 kids.
You can't have something grow inside you and think, it just starts as a baby. It spontaneously, comes out of mud. It's this understanding the cyclical nature of just about everything. And here's another view of Godart's illustrations, which are thoroughly capable and completely...
They're sterile.
Exactly. They're just okay. They're fine. They're very thorough, but they float in space. If I had a student in a drawing class, I'd say that is not anchored to anything. You haven't tacked it to the page. It doesn't have any depth. What are you going to do with that? The thing is that most of the contemporaries were working from dried specimens.
Right.
And she works from the living creatures and the plants that sustain them.
Well, she has a deeper understanding of life cycles.
And she's growing them. She's not just getting, here's a little dried out doohickey I brought you back from, Guyana. It's that she's growing them. And that's really quite remarkable. So here we have, I just had to put this in again. So is it, in fact, the importance of Merian is based on a specific, perhaps feminine synthesis of an observant and at the same time contemplative view of nature?
What?
Or is it the fact that this woman has got smarts and she's figuring it out and she's seeing things as cause and effect and putting things in a scientific provable order?
It doesn't even make sense what they say.
Well, it's just, she's a girl.
So stupid.
Now, when I say the name Linnaeus to you, what do you think?
I think of the Dine book. Temple of the Flora.
Temple of Flora.
Yeah.
Think about Linnaeus and the peas and how he bred the peas.
Oh, I didn't know
and
that.
the pea plants.
Do tell. I don't know anything about him.
He came up with he was our first taxonomist. Okay, so Carl Linnaeus was a Swedish naturalist, and he became known as the father of taxonomy. Taxonomy, for those of us that may have forgotten, is the classification that creates order from that whole mess of stuff in nature, and it groups all plants and animals into a genus and a species, such as us. We are Homo sapiens, right? We are supposedly the smart, upright.
Supposedly.
Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, Homo Trump. So what it is called is binomial nomenclature, and it was another typically Enlightenment kind of a thing where you're coming up with classifications so things can be ordered and it's methodical, and you can have all of these different groupings of things that make sense, and it's still in use today. So Linnaeus lived from 1707 to 1778. He was born 2 years after her big magnum opus of the Insects of Suriname. He also gave her credit. He respected her. Half a century later, respected taxonomist Carl Linnaeus cited Merian's illustrations for several plants and for more than 100 new animal species. He could regard hers with faith. It wasn't hearsay. He knew that they were true. And in fact, since then, at least 6 plants, 9 butterflies, 2 bugs, and 1 spider and 1 lizard have been named in honor of Maria Sibylla Merian.
Nice.
Yet we don't know
her
about
name.
her. We
Right.
didn't. And what I've given you is a little watercolor illustration that was done by Errett, who was somebody who was aware of how Maria Sibylla Merian was painting. But you can even see here, it's a diagram of a process as opposed to, essentially, if you think about it, what she's giving you is the movie. It is literally like a motion picture from egg to pupa and it's this lovely waltz of living that she can give on a two-dimensional surface. But I love the fact that, I keep thinking, well, where's Linnaeus and all of this? And I went, holy shit, he's later than she is.
He's not even alive.
Right. She precedes him, and he gives her credit. And I think that's just so exciting. So a couple of things then. Now she's starting to get recognized, and people are enjoying her pretty books of flowers and the bugs and their delicious flower habit. But her stepfather dies in 1681. And so Maria Sibylla Merian goes back to Frankfurt, her hometown, to support her mother and to get away from her husband because she's not really enjoying her time with him.
Oh, bummer.
And from her mother's house, she publishes her second volume on butterflies. She publishes her second volume on butterflies.
Self-published.
Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting because it's always fun to see how various sources state it. When one says, leaving Germany, Merian cannot have been happy in Nuremberg. She spent more time in Frankfurt after her mother was widowed in 1681 and separated from her husband in 1685. Separated from him. That's not done.
Right.
Remember, Maria Sibylla Merian and her mother were both incredibly pious Protestants. And they moved with their two daughters to this it's called the Naturalists had this sect. It's a Protestant commune that was in a castle in the Netherlands, and it was this Protestant sect where women worked and did their daily duties, and it was essentially kind of a monastic thing, if you will. The owner of Waltha Castle, Cornelius van Aronson van Sommerlingsdick, but the guy who owned the castle had this huge collection of natural history objects.
Oh.
And of course, Maria just adored those. And he had butterflies because where is he? He's in the Netherlands, right?
Yeah.
Dutch East Indies Company. All of these traders are bringing back specimens from Suriname, from South America. Now, she's been looking at all the cool things domestically, from Europe, but she's starting to see these glorious new critters that she's never, and the amazing colors of them. And here's the other thing. The commune did not want you to have any worldly possessions, but they had a printing press, and Maria was able to continue her work because you still have to have the word. And in the beginning was the word, and the word was God, and you publish the tracts, and you have to read things and sing them songs. So a printing press is a very important thing. So, when they moved to the Netherlands to join this community, which is named, they're called the Labadists because they were named after their French founder, Jean de Labadie. It is a whole new era for her because her brother Casper already belonged to that group.
Oh.
And so he's already there. And so once she gets there, this is so cool. She's separated from her husband, and he comes in 1686. He wants to say, hey, honey, come on back to Nuremberg with me. He wants to retrieve her. But the Labadist elders say, you're a very devout woman, and your husband, Johann, does not share your faith. So your marriage is no longer valid in the eyes of God.
Oh, what?
Yeah. They say, you don't have to stay married to him.
Oh, my goodness.
He does not share your faith.
Oh, boy.
So
he was Catholic, or he just was not
he wasn't
a religious
of their
person?
faith, and he wasn't expressing it. And so she
got a divorce?
Yes, she did.
What?
In 1692, she divorced him.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Exactly. So, she had moved through all of this,
I suppose Henry VIII had already been divorced.
Well, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived.
Right.
Yeah, that's 1533. So that's Holbein.
Yeah.
He's a whole century earlier, but he's Anglican. This is German. And but it's interesting that this woman is like, no, and she's got the two girls with her.
Oh.
Interesting also, right? So when her mother passed away in 1691, Maria decides, okay, we don't need to be at this commune anymore. We're just going to go straight to Amsterdam. because, well, that's where the Dutch East India Company is based, and that's the center of the world trade, man.
Oh.
And I think I want to start really understanding what's going in there. And Amsterdam has all of these scholarly collections. They have scientists there. It's a hub. And remember that at this time, I believe Amsterdam was still the single most literate place on the planet, right? And so here's this bright young woman with 2 daughters, and she finds her sea legs, man, where she becomes completely ingratiated with the influential scientists in the city.
Wow.
She gets to study in the collections of 2 very important doctors. One was Nicholas Witsen, and the other one is Friedrich Reich. And I'm wondering if he's the same family. He's a botanist that's the same family of Rachel Reich, the one that would do those floral paintings.
Oh.
So what Maria Sibylla wrote in the introduction to her Suriname book was, in Holland, I saw with wonderment the most beautiful creatures brought back from the East and the West Indies. It's like, oh my God. I mean, imagine. It's like suddenly seeing a whole other planet.
Wow.
Think about it. South America.
Yeah.
It's 5,000 miles away.
It's
right?
Yeah.
And it's the Dutch East India Company. Well, so she gets an idea. And she thinks, all right, I've moved to Amsterdam, and she's reestablishing herself, and she takes advantage, are you ready, of the Dutch laws, which allow women to run businesses, and made a very hefty sum selling her own illustrations. The Dutch laws for the middle class, and having some respect apparently for their women folk, they could run their own businesses. I have another pull quote that I just thought was cool. She says she was somewhat well known within both scientific and artistic circles, especially by women. At one point, she ran what was, as far as we know, the only all-female scientific illustration workshop in Europe.
Whoa.
At the time when science was most exclusively a pursuit of rich or rich-ish white men, Merian made her income strictly from science and teaching. Think about that.
That's amazing.
And so here she is at the center of the global hub of trade and tourism and explorers and all this great stuff coming in. And she's like, I gotta see this stuff. And while all these other guys like Good Art are making their illustrations from little dried out specimens, she's like, I gotta see these things in real life. I've gotta go see them for myself. So she manages to complete her daughter's education. That's all paid for. And she raised enough money for an expedition.
What? Whoa.
In 1699, at the age of 52.
Whoa.
This independent woman who has made her name in scientific circles and publishes her own stuff. So she's done all this. She's taken good care. She's made sure her daughters are bright. They're on board. They know what they're doing. She sold her paintings. She makes a will. And she takes her youngest daughter, and they go on a ship to the Dutch colony of Suriname in South America. And she and her daughter would be part of the Labadist colony there, that Protestant sect that's there. And that Protestant sect is one of the things that turned out to be pivotal in her success and legacy, because, again, it's like, you got to do you, and your understanding. I think it's still that respecting the creation that God made. You know, it's okay to investigate these things. He made them. And so just to be graphic about it, I was like, okay, so where's Suriname? Well, just take a look at that vast thing called an Atlantic Ocean, and you look at this little tiny little beep underneath, Sweden, sort of, on the English Channel. You're 52, you've got your daughter, and you're going to sail 5,000 miles to Suriname?
It's taken forever.
2 months.
Yeah.
2 months. And without any kind of male companion.
Right.
And they're on a ship.
Right.
Right? And so the 5,000-mile trip alone lasted 2 months and was perilous, as they say. And so she'd seen some of those dried specimens, but that just wasn't good enough. And it was like, she needs to go see them in real life. She gets there, and it turns out that the colony wasn't much safer than being on the boat. And as one source says, a fragile settlement with supplies often at the mercy of pirates and tropical diseases running rampant, it was hardly a place for a woman in her 50s. And remember, a woman in her 50s back in 1699 is not like a woman in her 50s in her yoga pants now.
Right.
Right? But Merian continues, she persevered, and still she persevered.
That's right.
And so she was there for 2 years. The idea was to be there for 5 years.
Oh.
She and her daughter spent their days studying all the local flora and fauna. And at this time, the Dutch Empire is still like growing, and there's this massive trade, but there's also a massive slave market.
I bet.
And Merian recalled this. Now see, this is also typical. Like if you get lost, what should you do?
Ask for help?
Correct. Ask for directions. If you need to go see where stuff is, what should you do?
You should go there.
Ask the locals.
Right.
Right? She said, in one place in her foreword, she says, the forest grew together so closely with thistles and thorns, I sent slaves with hatchets ahead so that they chopped an opening for me in order to go through this to some extent, which was nevertheless rather cumbersome.
Huh.
She learned from the natives what these various plants were, what they did. She documented them, all of their medicinal purposes. What I'm showing you here, what do you think that thing is that you're looking at in this really interesting illustration?
Well, I think I know what it is.
You do.
Oh, now I see it.
Yeah, it's different than what you're used to seeing it.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of this pale gray white thing, but it looks like a pineapple.
It is a pineapple.
Yeah.
And that's how they grow on a stalk. And those are the bugs that are associated with it.
Yeah.
Now, here in this great caption, it says, pineapples had recently been cultivated for the first time in Europe, but the fruit grew abundantly in the wild in Suriname. Merian made this first plate of the metamorphosis, noting that this was because the pineapple was the most outstanding of all edible fruit. And the image that she created here shows the pineapple in flower, accompanied by the cockroaches that fascinated Merian as the exotic plant.
As much as it
That's they're in there like, oh, this is yummy. I got to have this. And now, of course, I'm not. I'm glad she's fascinated with them. They still freak me the fuck out. But look how glorious that is. She makes these stupid roaches look really fantastic. But it's also interesting to see how a pineapple grows.
Right.
And then I wanted for you to be aware of other things, because it wasn't just the bugs and the flowers. She was doing the critters as well.
Wow.
And so, the Labradorists had started a community, La Providence, which included a sugar plantation. That gave Merian the idea of how, you go out into the country and study the wildlife, you see what's there. And usually, of course, only strong, healthy, strapping lads would go do such a thing. And here she is out in the countryside with her daughter in this hazardous climate in the tropics, because they need to. Talk about a passion project. Mm-hmm. She has to know what it is. So, they'd come across the Atlantic. They've done all of this stuff. Now she's going out into the jungle, essentially. The ones that are working on the plantation are like, what are you doing? You should be here with the sugar cane. Why are you going to go? What is that? And she collects she creates these images. She paints them all. And then when she gets back to Amsterdam, she's going to convert them into engravings. Sure. And what I wanted you to see on this one was, this is her forest rat, or opossum, carrying her young. And this is plate 66 from the Insects of Suriname. But look at this. This woman has taken the care to look at what a mama opossum does with her young'uns. And if you squint your eyes, you can see that was a watercolor.
Yeah.
And you can see how she already anticipates how the light values of light and dark, when you only have black and white, that's an image that can work without hand coloring. But then once you put that the watercolor on there, oh my God, how glorious. You can imagine, like, what is this old woman and her daughter? Why are they going out in the woods? Okay, fine. Well, so the thing that's also interesting is, Suriname was a Dutch colony. Are you ready for this? From 1667 to 1954.
Whoa.
And it was, it's in the northernmost coast of South America.
Right.
It was interesting that the city of Amsterdam helped sponsor this trip, because it was only going to help them. Their bright scientific star woman is going to go look at this. It was supposed to be a 5-year trip. And she was going to sketch the plants and the insects and the animals while she was there. Well, she couldn't, because she was only able to be there for about 2 years. She either caught malaria or yellow fever. Oh. And so she was forced to go back to Amsterdam after 2 years. Can you imagine having to go back being that ill for 2 months?
2 months on a boat.
On a boat?
No.
After you've been a free woman going out into the forest or what have you. I'm including this particular illustration because for those of you who have trypophobia, it's creepy, but check out how analytical this woman is. What do you see, Anne?
Well, I see a plant on the left that is partially submerged in water and partially in the air. And under the water, there is a rather large frog swimming along with, is that a cutaway into its,
Okay, so a Suriname toad with hatchlings on her back.
oh, on her back. Okay.
Uh-huh. With
Little eggs on her back.
Yep.
It's pretty creepy.
with this with the name of the plant and two shells, one containing a hermit crab.
Oh, there he is.
And so what this is, again, is a painting on vellum that she would have done there. She did these on the spot, apparently. That's what the sources
Wow.
say. And she actually said that this plant actually was used as a kind of spinach or in a salad. But what I wanted you to also notice, though, so she does all of these studies, but when she gets back, she's going to convert them into engravings. So working in her studio from the sketches that she made on the spot, and then she makes all these beautiful vellum watercolors. Think about this. She's got the vellum watercolors. She's got the originals, right? But then she's also going to make the engravings from them. So now she's got two different forms of income, right? Because you've got the originals.
But is she's selling them?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
Okay.
Because,
So they're flung to the wind.
Oh, no, I think she sold them very well. Like when she left to go to Suriname, she'd sold off all of her vellum originals,
okay. All right.
and she's going to come back with these kinds of things. What I'm showing you in this particular illustration is it's a facsimile reproduction of what this book looked like when it was completed in 1705. So she had it all put together, all of her research, her sketches, her notes, all of that put together in the Metamorphosis Insectorum Surinensiensum. And that's the most famous of all of her books. And I love the fact that she conceived it as a beautiful and desirable book that would appeal, as she explained in the preface, to both lovers of art and lovers of insects.
Interesting.
She's no dummy.
Yeah.
She's making beautiful images that are scientifically accurate.
Right.
60 engravings, both in black and white and some hand-colored. And so smart, published in both what?
Latin and German.
And German.
Wow.
Latin for the scientific community, German for the lay folk.
Wow.
Huh.
But not Dutch.
No, because she was from Germany. Yeah, you're right about that.
Huh.
But it was Latin and German. Well, maybe she still had access to the daddy shop.
Yeah, maybe.
The Frankfurt shop.
Yeah.
Things to consider.
Right.
But, that was the Nuremberg Chronicle.
Yeah.
1493 was published like that.
Right.
And a couple other things like Luther's Bible translated into German so that the normal folk could read and become even more enamored of these glorious images. So her popularity just went zoom through the roof when, people saw these naturalistic images. They had never seen hand-colored engravings like this. It's just ridiculously beautiful.
Wait, there wasn't, things were hand-colored, but not like flora and fauna, insects, etc.
Well, they were just like little bugs. These are fully rendered compositions.
Yeah. All right.
In fact, if I have you look at this and you think about how they're close to life size and they look like the actual environment with the bugs, don't they look incredibly natural? And don't they make you think of a certain American artist who is credited with having completely revolutionized the depiction of birds?
Yes.
Who might that be, Ann?
John James Audubon?
Yeah, who was working on that between 1827 and 1838. And she's doing this in 1705.
Right.
With the same high caliber observational artistic skill.
Crazy.
Right? So it's just phenomenal to me that even if you only were going to buy the book in black and white, it's still a glorious composition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting also that in this particular sense, you remember on the earlier books that the covers were in fraktur and all very charming. Now it's metaphor insectorum surinensiensum, and it's all in Latin appearing, and it's in Roman type to appeal to that broader audience, of course. And it is interesting that it was printed in German, even though it's published in Amsterdam. Things for me to research more. I just want to give you a couple more images to blow your doors off. Here's an image of a what? What's on the left?
A pineapple.
Yeah, ananas. And it's the life cycle of the butterfly that's related to the pineapple.
Well, this is, I think, what is, I've never really thought about the interconnected. I mean, I knew this sort of in the high level part, but I never have seen illustrations that make clear that there is a bug that goes with that plant and they support each other, and it's
Yeah. There's the pestification of insects, but there's also this symbiotic kind of a thing. And now you look at that pineapple, and I want you to think about what's a symbol of hospitality?
Pineapple.
Why?
I've never understood it.
Because when ships' captains came back from South America, they would bring pineapples with them. And when they would come, this happened in the colonies, the American colonies, they would come back, and when the captain was home, he'd take the pineapple and go and put it on his garden gate. And the pineapple says, "I'm home." It's a sign of hospitality.
Huh.
It's so interesting to see all of these, it's the trade, it's the shipping, it's the far-flung areas. But also, can you imagine when you're looking at the pomegranate, how many of those are growing in Amsterdam?
Right.
With a butterfly's life cycle. Look at the colors that these things have. There's no blue like that in butterflies in Northern Europe. How could she not have fallen so deeply in love with that?
Right.
In this particular image, I wanted for you to be able to see the on the left, you see the watercolor on vellum, and on the right is the way it appeared after she had converted it to engraving. It's a detail of this toad with its babies on its back. And you can see that she knows how to make it transfer incredibly well.
Yeah.
So you have these two versions. You can get the original, or you could buy the book. I can't tell you how much I love this particular. It's a detail of the life cycle of praying mantises.
Oh boy.
Now I can't imagine seeing them in Chamonix, but there they are.
Oh, we have them here.
Yeah, but they're just so damn magical. They're also a protected.
They freak me out.
Of course they should. They're praying mantises. Think about the surrealists and those praying mantises. You know the cartoon, right? The one from the New Yorker? Well, there's one praying mantis who's looking very angrily at the other one that has no head. And she's saying to him, "You slept with her, didn't you?" The surrealists just adore the nonsense of that.
They were growing them, breeding them.
I believe that.
Yeah, Breton had a cage in his house that he was breeding praying mantises.
I would do that. I did. I found some on my door last summer. They're so freaking cool.
They freak me out.
Well, they're
but their form is super cool.
Yeah, and their weird little Martian head that swivels. I mean, imagine this woman just like drinking it. She's in her 50s, for crying out loud. So the other thing is, it wasn't just birds and bugs. It was also critters. And so I wanted for you to see the curious behavior of the snake Corylus enhydrus, which curls itself into a tiny tight ball and tucks its head inside the side of jasmine plant. I mean, you can see her just voraciously taking in everything.
Oh.
Now tell me why you're I want you to tell me why you're This is good.
This is a sheet that includes examples of many rather large spiders.
Yeah, you mean tarantulas, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, here's this lovely middle-aged, well, she's probably actually older-aged lady
at that
for
point.
her time.
Yeah.
And she's done this painting of a giant spider eating a hummingbird. And, that was the kind of thing that might not seem ladylike, but it was absolutely fascinating to a European audience that had not seen such things. And,
you can never conceive of a spider being able to eat a bird, just size-wise.
Right, but if you think of tarantulas, they're about
huge.
the same size as the hummingbirds, right? And if you think about, okay, so here's this woman that's just creating these images. That's terrifying. That can't possibly be true, right? And here's the other thing that's really interesting. There's an article by a scholar named Etheridge I think at the New York Times, that how it was the Victorians who basically erased her.
Oh,
because in the Victorian era, women got downgraded, and women in science were not to be thought of as okay. It was the idea of women should be back at home and not being.
Did you love that? Because the leader of the free world was a woman named Victoria.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Vicky. You just tell us what. But everything had to be buttoned up tight, and everybody could. Yeah, it was the Victorian era that thought this couldn't possibly be true, and they pictured her as some sort of silly woman for thinking that a spider could eat a bird. Well, get this. Henry Walter Bates, a friend of Charles Darwin, observed this and put it in a book in 1863, vindicating Merian.
Nice.
Because in fact it was scientifically true, because she wasn't making this stuff up. Of course, there are here and there some small mistakes, but The veracity of what she's doing is quite amazing. The other thing you see in this plate is that she's describing leaf cutter ants for the first time, and the kinds of ants that build bridges with their bodies. I love this. She writes, in America, there are large ants which can eat whole trees bare as a broom handle in a single night.
Whoa.
And they're just, eating all of this stuff and then taking it down into their burrows for their young. Well, that's how it works. And so this is all in her metamorphosis. Just to make your flesh crawl a little bit more, I wanted to give you
do we have to?
Yeah, sure. There you go. I just wanted you to have an up close and personal of the tarantula eating that hummingbird. Yes, poor little Ann. She's having a rough go at this.
Gonna have a nightmare.
But it's a colorful nightmare.
It is.
They're furry. They're creepy. Yeah. So, but and
did you ever see like Emergency, the show with Randolph Mantooth, and like some guy would be taking a nap in a park, and a rattler snake would curl up on his chest,
yes.
and the tarantula. I'm like, no, I can't.
No, for me, it was the idea that your ear looks like a flower, and so it's a beckoning for bugs to fly down in there. And that just messes with me. But imagine here, I've given you a lovely spread of the book open to this page, and you pretend that you are a interested, well-read citizen who's gotten a hold of this book, and you don't have TV or a cell phone or anything, but you're leafing through this amazing book with this riveting story about a woman who's out there in the Suriname wilderness checking out these things and giving record to it. And it's really quite something. I wanted to share this other thing with you. Yes, she had slaves that were chopping her way through the forest, but get this. Merian did receive assistance naming plants. She had help in other ways. Her daughters did help her hand color her drawings, but she also made careful note of giving credit where it was due. She had lots of help from the natives of Suriname, as well as the slaves or the servants that were working on those sugarcane plantations. She was not a slave owner, or she didn't have indentured servants, but in some places she would write these very interesting passages that she includes her helpers. So get this. In her description of the peacock flower, which I've got showing here for you, which is really quite gorgeous, she says, the Indians, who are not treated well by their Dutch masters, use the seeds to abort their children so they will not become slaves like themselves. The black slaves from Guinea and Angola have demanded to be well treated, threatening to refuse to have children. In fact, they sometimes take their own lives because they are treated so badly, and because they believe they will be born again, free and living in their own land. They told me this themselves.
Oh, boy.
This is a progressive intellectual.
Yeah, no
she
kidding.
has freed herself from a crappy marriage and from a crappy system that was going to hold her down. She's managed to work her way around it. And look at this. She directly acknowledges the slavery, the colonialism of it, and she suggests that medicine should be a tool that could be used by women to have control over their... Oh, gosh, can you imagine? Certainly not in these United States.
No.
But this is in 1705.
Yeah.
Here I'm giving you the comparison to be able to see the vellum watercolor compared to when it was in print. Just a couple more riveting images for fun. Birds, big old toucan eating a little bird. Look at the incredible color of that.
Wow.
And this black tegu, it's some kind of a crazy looking reptile that looks like it's going to attack something. Look at this background. Look at how well she fills the space with that thing. This is, to me, so amazing. You guys are so lucky to live in a time where you can just Google Maria Sibylla Merian and go leafing through these beautiful images of plants in their various stages of life and the animals and the bugs that are associated with them. Her daughters also did learn this. One of a gavial that's eating a snake is done by her daughter. Both of her daughters did do some painting. Her youngest daughter did publish a final edition of this whole, a republication of the edition after Maria Sibylla Merian's death. Her legacy lived on. She was still very well regarded. I wanted to share with you, this is the engraving.
Oh, that makes more sense.
And this is the engraving that would be in the frontispiece before being goofed up with goofy color to satisfy. Now take a look in your lower right-hand corner.
You can see the Burens.
And there are the Burens, by God.
Yep.
And if you really take a look at it, you can really see all of the tools of her trade everywhere around her. This is a Renaissance woman in the Enlightenment And, just amazing to me that she had managed to get this all done on her own damn terms. So she's back. She's been back, since 1705. She published her magnum opus, but she had a stroke in 1715, and that left her partially paralyzed. She wasn't able to work anymore. And the part that makes me sad is that she died a pauper in 1717.
Oh.
But Dorothea published a collection of her writings and translated it into Latin, so that would have a broader audience yet again.
Amongst the scientists.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And so, as I'd said, the Victorian times, 18th and 19th century, there's also this huge movement to say women in science weren't supposed to be paid attention to. But during her lifetime, people were fascinated by what she was doing, and they were fascinated by the work she made. And they didn't care if it was made by a woman. What she was making was interesting and important and accurate. And it was kind of just disgusting to think how she just really dropped out of sight and didn't pop up again until the late 80s. But she's back, and that's a good thing, so that she gets to be on money and on a stamp and in our hearts. But here you see this older woman. This is the frontispiece on the volume that was published the year she died. That's a tired woman who has seen it all, but she is pointing to the truth. The truth is in the book, and the words will set you free. And she's the one that wrote those, So all of these things that she did, I just wanted to think about her in this great chain of being. And one of the things I would have my students do in history of prints was try and take a topic and take it from the beginning and see where it would get you. And very briefly, if we think about, I talked about Kesneri's book on animals that Dürer illustrated. This is by no means inclusive, but another guy we could talk about at the very end of the 18th century would be Thomas Bewick and his history of British birds or the quadrupeds. These were very important books that documented birds and their habitats.
And strangely pronounced Buick.
Yes, Bewick.
Crazy.
Even though it looks like
Bewick.
It's
Buick.
It's Buick like
those
the car.
Crazy Brits.
I know, those guys. We're going to them and their sauce. But, the thing is that each of these artists that create these volumes has a reason for doing them. Buick was an engraver, and we could talk about him some other day. But engraving he would do on the tiniest of scales. And it could be in a very small book that with incredible detail, but those would be field guides. You could take them out into nature with you. But they were very thorough and quite marvelous, these little histories that he wrote. And I would say that in the last one, here I show a tiny engraving by him of a eagle eating a small fawn. And it has that same kind of almost romantic life and death situation that we saw in the 1701, 1705 kinds of illustrations by this woman who's out in nature studying these things.
Right.
We could talk about Dr. Robert John Thornton and his glorious 3 volumes of plants, and it was supposed to be a whole illustration of all the sexual systems of Carolus fun Linnaeus that he had illustrated between 1799 and 1810. Still entirely Enlightenment, showing printmaking at another apex, a mezzotint, aquatint, hand-colored, all these good things working together. Best part would be to go on public domain, and you can just click on them and see these glorious...
The Temple of the Flora, 1807.
Yep, that's the last of the 3 books. That's the most popular. But if you think about the way he's showing the backgrounds, the environment of these plants, the little birds that are associated with them, Maria Sibylla Merian was doing that 100 and some years earlier.
Right.
Or we could talk about John James Audubon, who I brought up earlier. And it's the same deal. Audubon was so smart in his time, right? Thornton's books left him a financial ruin. John James Audubon, his books cost in now today's money, $2 million to print.
Oh my God.
And his goal was to have the books be as big as possible so that the birds would be life size. So the pages were something like 30 by 40 inches in these double elephant folios. But his watercolors were glorious. They were much more natural. They're in their natural environment. He'd poise the animals to look noble in the kind of strut that they would have. I'm showing you plate 1 from the Birds of America. He would sell them by subscription. So you could buy like 5. You'd have one big plate of a bird and then 2 mediums and one or two small plates with small birds, and the way they'd be arrayed in the book would be beautiful in terms of, changing the size and the tempo of it. But, that was a kind of thing that he tried really hard to get funded, and he did manage to compile maybe 200 sets of the birds of America, these massive things. I'm showing the flamingo, which fits the page, or these enormous things, or the fact that we have two beautiful representations of extinct creatures, the Carolina parakeet, which exists no longer, and the passenger pigeon. But he was out in nature, stumbling around out there, figuring out how to catch them, wire them, make them look alive. And, for all intents and purposes, you don't hear that Maria Sibylla Merian is like killing her critters. She's breeding them and letting them live. At the same time, I don't think it's fair to cancel Audubon because he had to kill these birds to make them work. I'm also showing you, for instance, the great northern loon, my favorite, because you get the sense of the background. But I will say that if you look at these, these two hawks tearing apart these two ducks, it was done probably about 1830. And you look at the way the page is arrayed, and you look at the use of the color and the fact that it's a hand-colored engraving, I'm going to say that Maria Sibylla Merian has all the brio, all the romance, all the skill, all the science that Audubon did, but she was making it go at a time when women weren't allowed to do much of anything, and she did it all. So that was my deep dive. I just think she's the bomb.com.
She's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, we all know about Audubon. Why don't we know about Merian?
I don't know.
So here I have Audubon versus Merian, like the great, battle royale. But they really are both exemplars of their time. But that's that passion project. Again, it's like Ann Shafer and Platemark. And how many episodes and wonderful people is she going to introduce you to? That's the same thing that these guys were doing with these natural wonders. So
amazing.
I hope that you enjoyed meeting this lady like I did. She was just too much fun for me to know.
Yeah, I didn't know much about, I knew her name, but that was it, really.
Yeah. I just respect the hell out of her.
Yeah. And
giving credit where it's due and saying, hey, the Dutch are treating these guys terribly, and this is what they're doing about it. It's like, she would have been a suffragette for sure.
Right. Yeah. But I'm also, you had a one comment back a bit about the Victorian era and how they, for whatever reason, put women in a box out of which we're still trying to crawl.
Yep.
And it's amazing to me that one tiny little island nation, sorry, UK people, could have the effect on women across the world like that still.
Yeah.
The hangover is immense.
Yeah. And then you get Margaret Thatcher. So, come on. It's just, it's just so odd to see where power sits.
Yeah.
But I'm so delighted. It was going to be about a bunch of naturalists, but screw it. It needed to be just about her.
Yeah.
She takes the cake, man.
Yeah.
She's the one. That's an Enlightenment thinker for you right there. She totally summarizes everything that the Enlightenment could be. And she's like...
Or the best of the Enlightenment.
Yes, absolutely. Before they fucked it up. But that's the end of this story. And if you guys feel like you need to know about anybody specific, you should tell Ann what you want to know about. Otherwise, we'll just keep chugging forward, and we're going to probably be doing some Hogarth here pretty soon, it being an election year. Oh, God.
Yeah.
And we'll do some Gilroy and some Rowlandson because they make fun of the politicians, too.
Right.
Then we'll have to talk about Goya. And, like that.
Goya, oh boy.
Yeah, because he's an Enlightenment guy, too.
Yeah.
Even though he lived in the most repressive country on the face of the planet.
I still can't get over how he was able to play both sides of the fence like that.
Oh, so smart. Well, just like her.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Just like her, really.
Crazy.
And he couldn't hear either.
That's true. He could ignore everybody.
Selective hearing. Yeah.
What'd you say, Your Worship?
I didn't quite hear that, Carlos. Sorry. Live long and prosper, friends. Go look up Maria Sibylla Merian. She's thebomb.com.
All right. Thanks, Tru.
You bet.
All right, everybody, that concludes our episode on our first female artist that we devoted an entire episode to, Maria Sibylla Merian. I hope you fell in love with her as we did. Stay tuned for our next episode. We're going to talk about William Hogarth, who was a British artist, probably one of the first to really skewer politics and the ruling class in a really seriously amazing way. Lots of work about parliamentary elections in England. It seems urgent, and Tru would really love for us to get it on the air before the election, so that's what we're planning. As usual, I'd like to thank Tru for being our SME. I think you're brilliant and love having these episodes on record for all of the peoples out there who love to listen to you talk about prints and all of the wonderful ways that it intertwines with our lives and our history. Thank you also to my usual list of people, Dan Fury for being my sound guy, Michael Diamond for the use of his original music as our theme song, and Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for being our sound effect guys. So appreciate your help. All right, as you know, the show notes will have for you the images that we've talked about over at platemarkpodcast.com. And you can also sign up for our email list and click through to join our Facebook group. I hope you are loving the History of Prints series on Platemark, and I hope you're also enjoying the other series of interviews that we're doing with various people. It's a passion project, as you know, and I really appreciate your support. All right, we'll see you next time.